The night started with a boast that sounded as big as the mountains around us. "Gentlemen," my buddy Dave declared, "tonight you're dining on my famous gourmet campfire stew." He even puffed out his chest a little as he said it, like a pioneer chef unveiling some ancient secret recipe. The rest of us, tired from setting up tents and hauling gear, leaned back in our camp chairs and let him have his moment. We'd eaten enough hot dogs and scorched marshmallows on past trips that the promise of something more, refined, well, it had us hooked. He set about his work with the confidence of a man who had clearly never cooked. Outside his own kitchen, pots clanged, spoons rattled, and the fire popped as he added sticks too fast, too hot. The flames licked the bottom of his old tin pot, blackening it before water had even touched the inside. He talked the whole time about balance of flavor, about rustic traditions, about how wood smoke elevated the palate. I'll admit, it sounded convincing with the firelight on his face and the stars above, but the smell creeping from that pot told a different story. At first, we caught whiffs of onions and some sort of dried herbs, promising enough. But then came the acrid smell of noodles sticking, burning before the heat even softened. Dave stirred furiously, the spoons scraping like nails on metal, and muttered something about caramelization. The broth reduced to nothing, the noodles blackened and curled like wood shavings, and when he finally lifted the lid with a grand voila, the pot offered nothing but a tangle of charred pasta, smoky water, and the faint aroma of despair. Still, pride wouldn't let him back down. He scooped it into our bowls, each portion steaming with the unmistakable tang of ash. Gourmet, he insisted. We raised our spoons like solemn judges at a cooking competition, each of us giving a brave first taste. It crunched. Noodles shouldn't crunch. Someone coughed, another laughed, and soon the whole campsite was roaring. Even Dave, spoon still raised, couldn't help but grin through the smoke. It wasn't stew. It wasn't even food, really. But in that circle of firelight, under the pines and the echo of our laughter, it became something better. A story we knew we'd be telling for years. By the time the fire had burned down to glowing coals and we'd all choked down at least a few bites of Dave's stew, the camp had quieted. A few of us drifted off to our tents with the smell of smoke in our hair and the taste of burnt noodles still clinging to our tongues. I figured the whole cooking experiment was behind us, but morning came crisp and cool, with dew on the grass and a pale mist hanging low between the trees, and Dave was already crouched by the fire pit with a look in his eye that spelled trouble. "Breakfast," he announced, poking at the embers with a stick, "is where a true chef shines. Forget last night. This is the real deal." He'd salvaged what supplies we had left: a carton of eggs cracked from the trip, a pack of bacon, and a bag of pancake mix someone had tossed in at the last minute. The ingredients were fine, but the fire was too hot, the pan too thin, and Dave's confidence still running unchecked. He started with bacon, which went from raw to a flame in a matter of seconds. The grease popped like fireworks, sending him back on his heels. We scrambled for water, but Dave, never one to admit defeat, flipped the pan with a heroic flourish that sent half the strips into the dirt and the rest welded to the blackened metal. "Extra crispy," he coughed, fanning smoke from his eyes. Undeterred, he cracked the eggs directly into the pan without cleaning it. The mixture sizzled on the greasy crust, edges curling like paper in a bonfire. He tried to stir, but the spatula stuck, leaving behind a scrambled mess that looked and smelled like rubber. We all stood around, half horrified, half amused, when he finally pulled out the pancake mix like it was his trump card. Now, pancakes over a campfire can be magic if you know what you're doing. done right. They come off the pan golden, steaming, with that touch of smoke that makes them better than anything from a diner. Dave, however, dumped the batter in too thick, and the pan was still burning hot. The first pancake blackened on the bottom before the top had even set. He tried flipping it, sending half the gooey mess into the coals. The second attempt welded itself to the pan, creating something between a hockey puck and a pot lid. We ate what scraps we could peel off, laughing so hard we barely cared that breakfast was a disaster. The birds overhead must have thought we'd lost our minds, laughing at the smoke rising in bitter plumes from that scorched skillet. Dave, though, still kept his chin high. "It's rustic," he insisted, scraping off another burnt pancake for himself. "This is how the pioneers did it." Rustic or not, by then it was clear. Dave's career as our campfire chef was over, but his legend as the camp clown had only just begun. By the third meal, our patience had worn as thin as the blackened bottom of Dave's frying pan. Hunger has a way of sharpening a man's priorities, and while laughter carried us through the first two disasters, stomachs were beginning to rumble with a seriousness that no burnt bacon strip could cure. So, with the firmness of a jury delivering its verdict, we told Dave he was officially relieved of duty. He took the news with mock outrage, throwing his hands in the air. "You people don't appreciate fine dining. History will vindicate me." But when someone shoved a knife and a bag of potatoes into his hands and said, "Fine, you can peel," he accepted with a smirk. We thought the worst was behind us. How wrong we were. The first clue came when the pile of potato skins grew strangely large, while the peeled potatoes shrank into pitiful little lumps. Dave peeled like he was carving soap sculptures, hacking away half the potato with every stroke. "Efficiency," he said proudly, tossing another sad nub into the pot. By the time he was done, we had enough peelings to feed a hog, but barely a handful of potatoes worth boiling. Next, we set him to chopping onions, a simple enough task, except Dave swung the knife like he was splitting kindling. Chunks of onion flew in every direction, some landing in the dirt, some into the fire, and one directly onto my lap. He sneezed dramatically at every slice, tears streaming down his face, and declared onions weapons of chemical warfare. When we finally sat him down to just stir the pot, surely the safest job, we thought we'd solved the problem. But stir he did with the enthusiasm of a cement mixer, splashing broth into the fire until the flames hissed and spat back at him. Smoke billowed, steam rose, and the stew boiled over. Dave just grinned and gave a little bow, as if he'd orchestrated the chaos on purpose. By the time we wrestled the spoon from his hands, the meal was still salvageable, simple, hearty, and actually edible. But the mess surrounding the fire pit looked like a battlefield. Onions scattered like casualties, potato peelings everywhere, and Dave beaming, sitting cross-legged in the dirt, as though he'd just completed a masterpiece. "Face it," he said, holding up his blackened spoon like a knight raising his sword. "No meal in this camp will ever be forgotten." And in a way, he was right. That evening, determined not to let Dave's culinary touch ruin another meal, we staged a quiet mutiny, while he wandered down to the creek with a coffee tin, swearing he'd return with the freshest water this side of the Rockies. The rest of us hustled to get dinner underway. We kept it simple. Foil packets filled with sliced potatoes, carrots, onions, chopped properly this time, and a few strips of sausage. We sealed them tight and tucked them into the glowing coals, letting the fire do the work without any interference. The smell was heavenly. After 2 days of charred chaos, that warm, savory aroma drifting up through the camp was enough to make us sigh with relief. When we finally cracked open the foil, steam poured out carrying the scent of real food. Softened vegetables, sizzling sausage, a hint of wood smoke that belonged there. We passed the packets around, grinning like kings at a feast. Dave plopped down among us, clearly impressed but unwilling to admit defeat. He chewed in silence for a while before muttering, "Not bad. Could use a little flair." We should have known those words spelled danger. Later, as we leaned back by the fire, bellies full for the first time all trip, Dave disappeared into his tent and re-emerged with a little brown sack we hadn't noticed before. With a mischievous grin, he announced, "If you won't let me cook, at least let me provide dessert." Out of the sack came marshmallows, graham crackers, and chocolate bars. Nothing unusual there, until he held up a bottle of something clear, labeled only with the words Uncle Ray's Special. Before we could stop him, Dave soaked a marshmallow in the stuff and held it high over the flames. The alcohol caught instantly, turning his marshmallow into a blazing torch. He whooped like a triumphant gladiator, waving it in the air, sparks raining down, dangerously close to the dry pine needles at our feet. We scrambled for water and stomped out glowing embers, shouting for him to put it out. Dave, cackling, tried to blow on it, only fanning the flame higher until the marshmallow melted clean off and plopped into the fire with a hiss. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of the fire and Dave's sheepish grin. "Maybe too much flair," he offered. We groaned, half furious, half laughing, and ordered him to sit 5 feet back from the fire for the rest of the night. He complied, still smirking, clearly satisfied he'd left his mark. And though dessert was singed and smoky, we realized something. No matter how badly he botched a meal or nearly torched the camp, Dave's antics had become the heartbeat of our trip. The final morning dawned bright and cool, the sky washed clean by a night breeze that had swept the stars away. We moved about camp with the practiced quiet of people packing up after days in the woods, rolling sleeping bags, shaking out tents, dousing the last of the fire. Breakfast was nothing fancy, just oatmeal and strong camp coffee, carefully overseen by anyone but Dave. He sat on a log, sipping his mug with exaggerated dignity, as though he had chosen retirement from the culinary arts rather than being ousted. The mood was lighter than it had been at the start. Our packs were no lighter, but the weight of burnt noodles, scorched bacon, and flaming marshmallows had somehow become the stories binding the trip together. As we walked out along the trail, the sun pushing golden fingers through the pines, we found ourselves replaying each disaster, embellishing details until we were doubled over with laughter. Dave, never one to let pride stand, in the way of a good joke, leaned into his role as the infamous camp chef. "You'll thank me one day," he said, striding ahead like a man certain history would vindicate him. Fine cuisine is always misunderstood in its own time. By the time we reached the cars, dusty and tired, we had made an unspoken agreement that later became tradition. Dave was banned from cooking, but never from coming along. We'd handle the meals, he'd handle the laughter, and though our bellies had been growling more often than they'd been full, none of us would have traded those smoky, chaotic meals for silence and perfection. Even now, when I smell the faint tang of wood smoke or hear the sizzle of something cooking on a fire, I can't help but think of him, spoon in hand, eyes gleaming with confidence, serving up bowls of what could only be described as edible comedy. The taste of those meals is long gone, but the memory, the laughter, and the warmth of those nights remain as vivid as the sparks rising into the dark. And that's the thing about camping. Sometimes the disasters feed you, more than the meals ever could.